To open the charge port, I've got to do this. Open butthole. It's all a bit childish. The Tesla Model 3 is a great car, but let's face it, it's not the prettiest, is it? Some people have said it looks a bit like a squashed frog. Others that it literally looks like it was made of bits of Elon Musk's face, crafted in his image, quite literally. But don't worry, there's a new one, and it's had a facelift. According to Tesla, it's more efficient, has longer range, is more comfortable, quieter, and features updated technology, all without being more expensive. Let's take a closer look. Before we do any of that, don't forget, head over to autotrader.co.uk where we can give you the tools you need to buy, sell, and lease your next car. And if you're curious about how much your car is currently worth, go to the website, put in your reg number and your mileage, and we will give you an accurate valuation in seconds. The data is completely independent and based on millions of vehicles, so you always get an accurate valuation. Right, let's talk about this face. The main difference are these headlights, which are a lot less froggy and are far more sleek than before. It gives the car a bit more of a handsome look, don't you think? Other changes include the fact it doesn't have the fog lights or the fog light trims that you get on the standard Model 3. And also down here, this air intake is a bit skinnier and a bit less in your face than on the previous car. Sadly, the new Model 3 doesn't have any front fog lights, which on the previous car were positioned low down for better fog penetration. Since these aren't a legal requirement and Tesla loves cutting costs, optimizing, they've been removed. If you live somewhere foggy, like the UK often is, then you might want to bear that in mind. The advantage to having this design is aerodynamic optimization. It basically means that the car's a lot more smooth on the front end, and they've actually managed to drop the drag coefficient from 0.23 to 0.219, meaning this is the lowest drag Tesla on the market today. And part of that comes from the fact that the bonnet has a slightly steeper rake. Also, the other benefit is that by having a steeper rake, it's also safer. So if you hit a pedestrian, their head doesn't have to travel quite as far before it hits the car. That's the theory anyway. Around the side, the body hasn't changed at all, but you do get a couple of new wheel designs in 18 and 19-inch sizes, and new tyres that are supposedly a bit softer to help improve the ride. You also get two new colours, grey and the same ultra red you get on the Model S. The doors have also been beefed up to help safety in the event of a side impact. There are a couple of changes around the back as well, as you'd expect from a facelift, including this lower bumper, which looks slightly nicer than it did before, and also some redesigned rear lights. I'm going to explain why I've got the hazard lights on, because the light situation on this car is quite interesting. These lights are actually all connected to the boot lid, so when you open them, look, the lights actually disappear, which is perhaps not the safest thing in the world. But these lower lights, that's where your hazard lights and indicators will live if your boot is open. So if you've got an IKEA wardrobe in the back of the car, or you've broken down on the hard shoulder. Apart from that, the boot itself is the same as it ever was, so lots of decent usable storage, 425 litres with storage on the right and left for your crisps and your bananas, some underfloor storage for your charge cables and pretty much whatever else. And there's an extra 88 litres of storage in the front trunk, although getting to that space is a bit of a faff because there's no external button for it. You've got to use the app or the screen inside the car. But yes, the Model 3 is just as practical as it ever was. Let's go check out the inside. Tesla has tried to make the new Model 3 feel a bit more upmarket, a bit more special, and added some functionality. The first thing I noticed when I sat in here is the new ambient light system, which is a light band that runs from the rear doors, all along the driver doors, up around the dashboard, and then all the way back around again. And you can customize that light to pretty much whatever you want. If I want it to go purple, I can do that. Red, I can do that. Yellow, green, blue, it's all there for you to choose as you like. Nice touch. The dashboard has also been improved. On previous cars, you had either a wood effect or a white finish, but now you get this quite interesting kind of fabric texture, and I believe you can customize that when you buy the car, and it does look like a slight improvement on the previous effort. Also, these vents are a little bit different to before as well. You can now choose to close off each side independently, which gives you a bit more flexibility with cooling one side of the car or the other. Other touches worth mentioning. I remember when the first generation Model 3 came out, and I criticized the fact that it didn't have blind spot indicators, and all the Elon stands came for me saying you don't need it. Well, guess what? Elon's listened. He has. He's now put little blind spot indicator lights up here in the speakers. Unfortunately, they're not very bright. You just get this very faint red light to warn you when someone's in your blind spot. But it is a nice and welcome touch. Maybe the next generation could have a slightly more usable and safe interpretation of my suggestion. But thank you, Elon. That's a nice touch. Elsewhere, we have a new center console with these aluminium finishes. So up front, loads of space in there. Just behind that, you get cup holders, and the action on these is really nice as well, really nice and smooth, and then loads of space in here and inside here. You actually get a USB-C port plus 2 more behind, and these are actually really useful because they are 65 watts, and that means they're powerful enough to allegedly power a laptop. And look what I have here, a laptop. Does it work? Yep, charging. Really useful addition. That's a nice touch. Apart from that, the screen has been redesigned slightly. It's the same size as before, same resolution, same processor, but the bezel is now thinner, and that, according to Tesla, means that you get more usable space to work with. I can't work out how, but that's what they say anyway. And yeah, oh, the big one. Yes, the steering wheel's different. Now, you don't have any stalks behind the wheel because Tesla say they wanted a much less cluttered driving feel. I've never sat in a car and thought, oh my God, there's so much clutter behind the steering wheel, but clearly Tesla have, and they now have all the indicators integrated on the wheel, the flashers, the wipers, the voice control. It does take some getting used to, and I'll tell you exactly how I get on in just a second. But speaking of clutter, if you want clutter, just look at this screen, because all of your functions in here, from your wipers to your heating to pretty much everything, is all done via this display. And it is in equal measure brilliant and sometimes frustrating, but it's a Tesla. That's what you get.
In the back, you get a decent amount of leg and headroom, although the floor is a little on the high side. The rear seats have been angled slightly differently so as to make the backrest a bit more comfortable. There's an armrest with cup holders, and most interesting of all, a new touchscreen that lets you control the aircon, media, and watch videos, including on the YouTube app.
I've been quite looking forward to driving this car because Tesla are talking quite a good game when it comes to improvements. I actually own a Model Y, and I've driven countless Model 3s, so I know all about those cars' shortcomings, and I know what I'm expecting from a big upgrade. Now, the big thing for me is going to be the suspension, and I will come back to it in just a second. I want to experience the car and then give you my honest take. So before that, let's talk about this car's other big talking point, and that is the steering wheel. I've got to say, it takes quite a bit of getting used to. When I first jumped into this car, the first thing I did was reach for invisible stalks to put it into gear and to indicate, and I kind of felt like an idiot because obviously there's nothing there. If you want to put it into drive or reverse, you've got to slow down to an appropriate speed and then slide it into drive or reverse. And if you want to indicate, you've got to use these capacitive buttons on the left-hand side. Now, it does take some time to get your head wrapped around it, particularly because the buttons keep moving. If you're on a bend, they're not on the left anymore. They might be up or down, or if you're going around a roundabout, they're constantly all over the place. So what I found was that I had to physically look at the steering wheel to identify exactly where they were located, and obviously that means you're taking your eyes off the road. It's not the safest look in the world. Okay, I thought I'd need longer, but I've driven it enough. I can tell you straight away, the suspension in this car is much better than the previous generation. They've changed the springs and dampers, they've changed the bushings, they've changed the suspension geometry at the front, and the whole thing just feels a lot more comfortable. They say it's about 25% better in terms of impact noise than before. In other words, if you go into a big speed bump, that big thud you get is reduced quite significantly. And I've got to say, yeah, I believe him. The whole thing feels a lot more slick and smooth and comfortable and nice than before. It doesn't feel like a Tesla. The other thing is that the car's very, very quiet now. Tesla say they've improved the ambient noise by 30%, so you're less likely to hear things going on outside, and that includes the horn, would you believe it? So if I beep it, it sounds like it's barely on. It's a much more calm and quiet place to be. The road noise has also been improved by 20% as well, and that's partly down to the tires and also better sound insulation all around the car. So it just feels like a much more luxurious thing to drive than before. It's actually much better than the previous generation. There are two obvious upsides to that increase in refinement. The first is that because it's quieter, you can enjoy the stereo more. The previous car had 14 speakers, this has 17 speakers, and they sound absolutely immense. This has one of the best sound systems I've heard in pretty much any car, to be honest. It sounds great. The other advantage is that if you're on a phone call, people can hear you better and you can hear them better. Also, Tesla used to have a single microphone in their cars, but now they've actually got two microphones, and each one of those is better than the previous generation microphone, which means that the sound quality that other people hear from you and your passengers is much better than before. Hear that? So that noise is new. That is a speed warning. So if you go slightly above the speed limit, as I just did or didn't do, basically the car warns you and tells you to slow down, and that's all part of a new EU law where pretty much every single new car has to have that feature. You can actually disable it by tapping the button there to shut it up, but it's a pretty useful addition in terms of helping you stay under the speed limit. In terms of power and performance, it's pretty much as you were. This is the dual motor long range, which means it's got a motor at the back, a motor at the front, and in total they make 490 horsepower, which is very impressive. That's, well, sports car territory, isn't it? And that means it'll do 0 to 62 in 4.4 seconds, and it's, yeah, just as responsive as ever. This will defeat many a hatchback, many a sports car in terms of that initial acceleration. The top speed is a bit lower than before. So the previous car did 145 miles an hour. This only does, I say only, it does 125 miles an hour. And the reason for that is because, believe it or not, the tires. They've gone for much more comfortable, much more quiet tires than they had on the previous generation car. And these tires are not rated for high speeds. They only got to a maximum of 125 miles an hour safely, which I think is a pretty decent compromise, because unless you live, next to an autobahn, pretty much nobody is going to be driving an electric car at autobahn speeds. Right, I'm just going to pull into this little area to show you a little known feature on this new Model 3. So let's say I park up against this wall, right? This car will actually select reverse or drive for me, depending on your surroundings. You don't have to do it, the car does it. So you get in, shut the door, put your seatbelt on, and instantly the car knows I've got a reverse. So I just tap the brake pedal, it goes into reverse, and now I accelerate, and it goes backwards. How cool is that? Let's see if it works the other way around. So I'll go into drive and I'll reverse up against the exact same wall, and in theory, it should know that there's something behind me, and the gear that it selects should be drive instead of reverse. So, all right, there's a wall behind me. I put it into park, seatbelt off, door open, door shut. I've just got in, tap the brake. I'm gonna accelerate. Will it go forward? Yeah. Very clever, isn't it? It knows your surroundings and will automatically select forward or reverse as necessary. The one really cool thing that I like about the steering wheel is that it has this camera button on it, easily accessible. You push that and suddenly you get the rear facing camera and the two side facing cameras on the car. And that's really useful when you're trying to maneuver in town or you're trying to parallel park to know exactly where the curb is. That is quite a nice touch. Here's something that's quite annoying. I've just noticed it, and that is this new dashboard with your new ambient lights. There's an annoying reflection all the way along the bottom third of the windscreen, and that's always there. Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, it looks pretty, but there's a line in my way.
Range is better than the current generation Model 3, not because of the batteries, but because of the improved efficiency. The entry-level rear-wheel drive car, which costs £39,900, will go 344 miles. And the long range, which is 10 grand more, will go 421 miles, which you'll really like if you travel long distances. Now, here's a few things you might not like.
These seats are really good, very comfortable, but are the fans a bit noisy for the ventilation? Also, Where's my massaging seats? Even an Astra's got massaging seats now, Elon. Annoyingly, the Model 3 is still not a hatchback. It's a saloon, which means this boot lid doesn't open very wide. Look at that, the glass gets in the way. So even though you get a big boot, the actual opening is tiny, which means the space isn't really maximized. This screen, again, is super busy. It has all the functionality in the world, but it still doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Why? The car has all the cameras in the world, including rear, front, left and right, but it still doesn't have a bird's eye view camera to help you park in a space. You might have noticed the car doesn't have any ultrasonic parking sensors, and that's because it uses cameras to judge how far away it is from obstacles like people and things. And it's not very accurate. Why do I need Elon Musk's sense of humor to do normal everyday stuff? To open the charge port, I've got to do this. Open butthole. It's all a bit childish. So what's the verdict? Any good? Definitely. I think this is a really nice improvement on the previous generation Model 3. The refinement is excellent. I love the suspension. I love the quietness. I think it looks better than it did before. It drives pretty much just as well as it did in the previous generation, but now it just feels a little bit more grown up, a bit more premium, and as a result, is more desirable than ever. If you were ever put off buying a Model 3 because you didn't think it was premium or fancy enough, then I think this car might just change your mind.